Welcome back to Knits and Bolts Costume Design. I'm Rebecca, and let's go on today's adventure on making a 19 teens corset.
Hello friends, we're getting started on the next project. So I'm working on my corset for my 19 teens outfits. I'm going to use Scroop Patterns Rilla Corset, and I recently watched a video by Costuming Drama where she made lacing strips to help with mock-ups to go with making corsetry. Now there's a fine art to corsetry, and there's lots of videos out there on how to make them different things. So I'm novice. I've never made a corset before. I have worn modern corsets that were off the rack, so it wasn't tailored to fit me. So this will be so outside of my comfort zone, as Rebecca from Pocket Full of Poseys says. So I'm going to jump right in, and we're going to get started with this. If you want to see how those lacing strips were done by Costuming Drama, I'll try to link that video for you if we can. But I'll kind of show you my process here as I go along. So actually making these lacing strips so far has been totally easy. I know, about to kick a gift horse in the mouth here. But I followed Costuming Drama's video and using measurements that I thought would do for not only this 19 teens corset, but I have plans to make an 1860s corset as well. So I just did an average length that I thought would fit for both of those corsets. So I used her measurements along with tweaking them to fit mine. So this is cotton duck. It's a canvas-like material, and so I have the width here of the lacing strips. So this would be on the corset like so, and then I have marked the boning channels. And then in this center portion here will be where my eyelets will go. And I am ordering some steel boning to go here, especially on this outside edge. But I'm going to use synthetic whalebone and baleen type product as a substitute until I can get those bonings in, because the ones I have are not wide enough, and they are obviously way too short. So but I did use that kind of as a guide here as I went. And so my next step is to sew in the boning channels and then mark out my eyelet placements. So here's hoping and this turns out pretty good. Okay friends, so I have now sewed in my boning channels, and I have marked down this center area here. So I'm going to use this tool. It's called an awl, and I'm going to push the awl through, and the awl just moves the fibers of the fabric to each side instead of breaking them and causing a space so that you can insert your grommets. So it takes a little finagling. Be careful because the end point here is sharp, so you want to keep your hands free of that, of course. And you just work it back and forth. There it goes. And remove that. And then these are my grommets. It's just some that I had on hand. And not what my pattern for my 19 teens corset calls for. This is just to use for mock-ups of corset, so this will just be, this way I don't have to, you know, grommet and re-grommet as I go along for mock-ups. So you just place the grommet in the hole, and I may have to make a little bit bigger hole there, for my awl is a little bit smaller than these grommets. Now the grommets that I will use for my 1910s corset, of course, the size of the awl is about the same size as the grommets that I'll use for that. But I'll make sure I enlarge that hole, and then I'll insert the grommet and the washer, and set them with the hammer. And so I'll come back when I've got that all set. Okay everyone, so I'm going to show you how I'm inserting the grommets. I've got my holes here, and so I have this little tool that's this little disc on the bottom, and then I put the washer on the bottom, and then I put the grommet on top, place that on top, and then I place the tool on top like so. And I don't have a rubber mallet, so a good old hammer will do. Get a few good wallops, and you get the idea. I'm now at the point where I'm going to start prepping my pattern for my corset. So there's 2 pages, so I'm going to take those together, and then when I get that done, I'll come back and we'll go to our next step. So I've got my adjustments made to each one of my pattern pieces. Now these 3 pattern pieces in the middle, I made the additions to both sides. The front and the back, I made it only at the seam, because on the back I'll have my lacing strip on that side, and on this front piece I'll have my busk. So I just used, this is moving paper. So I bought a box of paper when I moved from the moving company. Have had it left over forever. Might as well use it in patterns. So that's all this is. I just transferred all the markings from the pattern to the new pattern. So our next step here is going to be ironing my mock-up fabric. That's over here. Now this is just regular muslin. This is just going to make sure that I see if I have the fit right, and then go from there. So if I need to add or lengthen, I can use this cheaper fabric. Then once I make sure I have enough fit, then I will cut a mock-up out of my cotton duck that I made my lacing strips out of. Check the fit there, and then see if I need another mock-up after that. And then once I'm sure the fit in the duck fabric, then I'll go on to my fashion fabric. Okay, so now I have my pattern pieces on my muslin fabric. So I've got all of that pinned on. I'm getting ready to cut that out, and I'll come back when I have that all cut out. Okay, so here is the mock-up number 1 cut out. So now we're going to put this together and see what it's going to look like. Alright, so I'm at the next step here for my mock-up. So I have my stitching line marked. I have where the beginning of my busk will start, and where each one of the loops of the busk will go through. So it would look like this once it's in, you know, it'll be inserted, but the loops will come out the gaps. So I'm going to follow the pattern instructions on how to do that, and then we'll go on to the next step after that. I am ecstatic, you guys. I have never made a corset before, and I am just so ecstatic just to get this process started. Took me a while to understand the instructions, but once my feeble little brain wrapped around the instructions, well, they were not written poorly, just comprehension was bad. And look,
It fits. It's not sewn in on the other side, but look, it fits. I'm so freaking ecstatic. Not even a lie. Okay, friends, first step is done. So I have gotten my facings on. This is for the loop side of the busk. This is for the bud side. So it will look like this once I get it all inputted into its proper locations. So the next step the instructions are giving is how to insert the busk through the holes and place the channel for the busk and how to secure it both at the top and the bottom. So once I get that done, it has me use, once that's in place securely, then I follow the instructions on how to mark the bud placement, and then I'll use an awl to open up those places in the front, this front piece, so that I can insert the buds, and then the instructions go on how to say to put the channel in to hold the busk in place there. So that'll be the next step. So I'll come back once I have that complete. Okay, here's this step showing it complete. This will be a better angle. So here I've got my busk secured. I've got my waist stay already in place on this side. And get it in place. There you go. So that's what it would look like closed. So now we're on to the next step, is moving on to my mock-up number 2. This is the cotton duck canvas material. So through my experimentation with the muslin fabric, I found that I increased too much, and then the actual pattern was just a little bit small. So what I've done is I've traced out the pattern itself, and then I've left extra space around each piece to cut it a little bit wider. Then once I mark the markings on the other piece, so there will be on the second piece for each pattern piece, I'm going to mark the markings, and then I'm going to mark the 5/8 seam allowance that the pattern calls for. From there, this will give me a little bit of space to adjust seam allowances and things of that nature to allow if this is too small. Alright, so now I've got the pattern pieces traced out with also a 5/8 inch stitching line. I did leave, let me get over here on this edge so that you can see this. So this is the outer edge. I made my markings, and then here I placed my stitching line, and here's the outline of the pattern as it came in the package. Now I left extra, so if I need to add a little bit, I have that, and I won't have to cut another mock-up unless there's a greater amount that I need to add. So I'm going to follow the instructions just like I did in the muslin mock-up on construction, and I will check back with you when I have some of this put together. Alright, here is the Rilla Corset put together in mock-up number 2. So we're fixing to try this on and see where the adjustments need to be made. Now, sorry for the lighting here. I'm trying to use some of the natural light, but I've still got a lot of shadowing going on. But let's see if this thing fits. Guys, so this is, don't have enough room to step back where you can see the whole thing. So I'm going to show you the top. So it is a little bit big at the top. So I'm going to have to take this under bust area up, and I think I'm going to have to pull it down just a little bit to get it in the right position. And see if I can get this filmed here where you can see the back. So, looks like the lacing gap is good. Oops. Lacing back seems good. Just need to tie that off. The camera here. So it comes down like it should over the hips. So my busk ends here, so it doesn't hinder me sitting. Now my waist tape will be secured once I get boning in. So I'm going to trim this, the excess off, and that will, I didn't need the excess in my seam allowances. Now I am going to have to figure out exactly how much to take up here in this under bust area to make her fit appropriately. But after I do that, she is good to go and we can go on to fashion fabric. Yay! All right, so I have now made the adjustments to the pattern pieces for the under bust for my corset. I believe I've got them right. Hopefully they'll be a good fit. Now, instead of making changes to each pattern piece where I couldn't use that in the future if body shape changes or if I want to make this for someone else, I'm using my mock-up piece as the pattern piece. So I just made the adjustments using the pin markings, not only and friction pen, but straight pens as well as my guide for making the adjustments for each piece. Now these pieces, I do not have to make any adjustments to them whatsoever. This is all good. I'm going to use them just like they are out of the package. And of course, I salvaged my waist tapes. I thought maybe at first they were going to be a little bit short, but at this point, I think I'm going to be good. And then I also salvaged my busk. Okay, so I salvaged my busk. And then next is I'm going to show you our fashion fabric for this corset. Now this is, hopefully the color comes out on camera. It is a soft peach colored. This is a poly blend brocade that I found in Joann's discount bin. Right price, couldn't pass it up. Not only did I go once, but I went twice to make sure that I had enough to do a corset for myself. So I will do the same as I did for the mock-up fabric, is I'm going to use the pattern pieces to draw out and cut out the pieces. And then instead of doing it on the fashion side, the outside of the fabric, I'm going to do it on the interior, just in case it doesn't come off of this. And then, so we're going to get that process started, and I'll come back when I show you what I've got. Hello everyone, I thought I would show you a little bit about how I'm pinning everything down. On this pattern piece here, I'm making sure everything is following the grain line. So I'm just using a clear ruler. I'm measuring from the edge to the line. And I'm just making sure that both at the top and the bottom of this line, they're the same distance from the edge. So I'm just adjusting. And then, there we go. So we'll be able to pin this in place. I'm just checking, making sure nothing's shifted. Okay. So then I'm going to do this for the remaining pieces, and I've got one more to go, and then we'll start cutting this out and doing the markings. Alright, so I'm going to show you how I mark my pattern pieces. So I've cut out 2 of each of my pattern pieces, and so I want to transfer the markings to the wrong side of the fabric. So on this pattern there is markings for the placement both on both sides for the boning channels. Then there is a section here for marking the waist date. Now I'm going to transfer those over to my pattern and just do it using a friction pen. And with this friction pen, they're by Pilot. I just get them in my regular store at the stationery section, and marking off all the markings here. Just making sure that my pattern all lines up. Okay. And then I'm checking here. Now, this friction pen is heat sensitive, so when I start ironing everything out, then these marks will go away. Now I'm just using a regular hem gauge. Mine has a little hole in here, and I am going to mark out my 5/8 seam allowance, which the pattern calls for. Let's see if you can see me do this. And you get the idea. And I'll go around each pattern piece and marking them all out. I'll make sure that I label them so I don't, because all of these pieces are similar in shape. So I do want to write on here what piece it is so I can match them up. And that's what I'm doing with this one. There we go. All right, and we'll get these all marked out and we'll get some construction going. Okay, friends, I've got this all marked out. Now, one thing I have discovered in transferring my markings from the pattern pieces onto the fashion fabric was that this motif of the roses stretches, and this is on grain. I made sure that, but it still has a stretch to it on the way that the fabric was constructed. So that's going to give too much give and not enough support for the corset, even though the pattern is designed to be a 1-layer corset. So I had to pick apart my mock-up number 2, and I have pinned this together to give the brocade some more body. That was more work, but in the long run, most of my markings were still on the mock-up, so it allowed me to, just minimal markings going forward. Now, since this is the case, I now have 2 pieces. I need to make sure that we have these flatlined together. If you don't know what flatlining is this is where you stitch the 2 pieces of material together, keep them from shifting, and you treat them as one piece of fabric. So I'll go around the edges and flatline this, and then when I construct it, I will still go on my seam allowance marking to construct the pieces together. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to flatline all of these pieces, and then I can start construction. Okay guys, this is so freaking cool. Did not plan it, but the front 2 panels have this absolutely beautiful rose motif on each side. Could have not planned that any better if I tried. I would show you inserting the bones into the corset. So this is the back. This is where the lacing portions will go. So when I purchased my boning, it was spooled up and it has a sharp edge on the end. Each of these corners are sharp. You would not want to put these into your boning channels, because after you bind it off the top of your corset, then these is possibly with wear and tear that these sharp edges could poke through your fabric. So though you round them off to give a better edge. Let's see if we can get this. So they're rounded off. And here it says power tools are not useful in sewing. So this is just a regular Dremel tool purchased at Walmart. And I use that and with the sanding bit to round off the quarters. Now, per the instructions on the pattern, if your well bone it has a curve to it like this does, then you want to insert it with that curve towards your body. So this white portion will be towards my body. So I'm going to go ahead and insert these into the channels. Just like that. Alright, so we're back for our next step. And our next step is going to place a grommet at each one of the markings. Let's get this where you can see. So I've marked each place where the grommets will go. So I will use my awl, poke the hole. Now I am going to have to use this chopstick to widen the holes just a little bit. And then I had mentioned that I used larger grommets for my lacing strips. These are the smaller ones. They're 00, which is what the pattern calls for. So I'm going to get busy and get these grommets set so that we can get started on the final fitting. Okay, so the fit looks good. I will need to pin my waist tape in place following the marks, and then place the boning channel and whatnot in to start finalizing getting everything done. But I'm going to turn around here. Okay, so now that I'm turned around, see if I can get some good back shots here of the back. Let's see if we can step forward. Nope, not happening. But there we go. It's a little better. Little wider lacing gap than I had intended, but that just means no more Oreos. And we can lace it up, and it's not too terribly tight. It's comfortable, but I suppose if I worked at a little bit, I could tighten it up a little bit, especially at the top. I think it needs to be a little bit tighter. Seems a little bit loose, but I think just tightening the lacing strips will, the lacings will take care of that. So now my next step is to get the waist tape in place and then start adding the boning channels. So guys, I'm just pressing my boning casing and just going to give them a really good press. And then I'm going to wait until they completely cool before I remove the pins, just for safety, and give them an opportunity to hold their shape a little bit longer before I remove the pins and start adding them to the corset themselves. Now I'm not doing an ironing motion, I'm doing a pressing motion, just because I don't want to take the chance of the pins moving and then everything coming unfolded and then we have to start all over. I'm just giving it a quick press. Probably overkill here, but just want to make sure everything is pressed nice and smooth before I proceed. Alright, so the next steps on the instructions say for me to press the seam allowances to the back of the corset. Now I do have my boning channels marked that they will go, so I'm trying to be mindful of not to move those, and then also where my waist tape will go. So we'll just go throughout the whole corset and ironing the whole bit. So the next step has you pinning the boning channels from the right side into place, and then there's a 1/16 of an inch from the seam where you sew them down the middle. So I'm going to do that, and then when I come back I will see what our next steps is. I do believe it is sewing down each side. I'll have to double check that, and then we'll go on to our next steps from there. Alright everyone, our more astute viewers will probably have noticed my mistake, When I was verifying my instructions on where to sew next, it's like, wait, this will leave like the whole bottom half of my corset with a raw edge where I joined the two panels. I didn't make my channels long enough. Even though the boning goes to here, the channel is supposed to go all the way to the bottom and the top of the corset. So I've now got those all fixed. I'm going to get them all sewn in place, and then we'll go on to our next step. I'm down to my next step, or a couple of steps. I'll do those both in the same step. I'm going to sew down each side of each boning channel and then remove the basting pins for the waist tape. And then I will also be attaching the waist tape underneath this outside edge of that boning channel. I'm going to get all that done, and then I'll come back, and then it's inserting some boning and checking to see if it fits. Alright, so before I cut my boning channels to check my final fit, I have went through the corset, and at each channel I have labeled them. So I might then put in the piece of boning for each channel. So I've done that on the right side of the corset. I've also done it on the left. See if you can see that. And then I'm going to use masking tape to label my bone when I remove it, while I put on the binding at the bottom. And then I will know exactly which piece of boning to put back into the corset when I'm done. Alright friends, so I've got my boning in. Up here you can see I've got it sticking out. Now I cut it a little longer than necessary, just in case I need to adjust the length, go down farther on the corset, like down, down towards the bottom. Now on my boning casings, you can see where I have marked with friction pen. This is where I either came too far towards the center, or it popped the seam, it was just too tight. I didn't follow the side edge, or like where I joined my boning channels, where the boning it gets caught in that seam. So I had to open it up in some cases, and I'll show you, like right here. It wouldn't go down to the mark where it needs to be because of this seam. So I opened it up and pushed the boning down where it should be, or almost where it should be, just so that I could take a look at the fit. I discovered that at some point that my bobbin had run out, and I knew that when I got to the end, but for some reason I didn't go back and sew that center seam there. So I have to do that so that these two bones will lay in their own channel. So I have to do that. But so what I need to do now is try this on, make sure that, it still fits with the boning and everything. And then I can permanently attach this portion of the waist tape in there. And then I will make sure that the next step after that would correct all the mistakes. Make sure I put in the bottom stitching for the boning channel where I have my pins. And then I do need to sew up this bottom channel here. I realized that I put the bones in to check the length, but I didn't sew across here for some reason. So this is at the bottom of the corset, so I'm going to have to do that. And I realized because I didn't get this far, I didn't sew this, that I cut these bones too long. So that means they actually stick out the top. So I'm going to have to trim this, down a little, the boning, and then also I'm going to have to put the binding on there. So I made them too long. There's nowhere to sew. So that's got to be fixed. So I'm finding the little mistakes. Honestly, I'm really happy with... You're being a problem child. You realize that, right? Okay. You done? Okay, good. Alright. Now, so I have finally been able to get my boning channels cleaned up. So I fixed all my boo-boos. Since I used a heat pen, I was able to take the iron and I went over all the areas to make a clean slate. Made sure I left my markings for each one of my boning channels so I know which piece goes back where. And then I'm going to do the next couple of steps here, and then when I reinsert the boning, since this is clean and there's no markings or anything, if I need to make any adjustments on the boning channels, I'll have a clean, clean slate so that I'll know where to make all of those changes. Alright, so the next step is to bind off the bottom of the corset. So I've marked the according to the directions and sewed along there. The next is to add bias tape to the bottom. So I made mine out of the fashion fabric. Pattern says you can also use tape, I believe like linen tape, as a binding. So I'm going to go ahead and get this sewed onto the bottom and then go on to the next step. All right, so I've done a little bit of progress. The binding is on the bottom of the corset. I am so glad. I'm getting so tired of this fabric fraying. It's looking nice. The next step is to get these cut to the proper length and put back in their boning channels. See, I've got them all labeled up so I know which one goes back into which channel. They coincide with my labels on the inside of my corset. So that's going to be next. All right, now I have the binding on the top as well. My boning is in, and I am ready to add some pretties to this and call it good. I'm adding this cute little heart shin lace at the top, and I'm trying to decide if I want a bow in the center, and I just don't know.